Welcome to the Passing Through podcast, a show dedicated to exploring those spaces not just within, but also between and around us. The cracks in the walls, the moments between the moments. I speak with thinkers, authors, artists, teachers, and everyday humans who have touched the edge of the ordinary and found something to bring back. Greetings to you, dear listeners. I'm coming to you from Wrocław, Poland today, on a gray and rainy day in March. I'm recording this from inside of Wilma, inside of the van, and I am on a somewhat busier than expected residential street. And this is the blessing and curse of this podcast as I pass through these new and sometimes unfamiliar spaces. So you're going to have to enjoy the ambience of this city street, which is a city that a decade ago in 2016 won the European Capital of Culture. So at least there's that. And in last week's episode, I mentioned that I wanted to dedicate an entire episode to the Buddhist meditation technique of Vipassana. You might know it as Vipassana. I'll probably alternate between the two depending on whichever one arrives first when I'm about to say the word. And the reason that I want to talk about Vipassana isn't only because I just came from my third Vipassana experience, but it's because ecology, spirituality, and liminal strangeness are three themes that I enjoy exploring on this show. And anything that we can do to open up and stretch your third eye is a worthy pursuit, I think. So you could think of this episode as like a little Buddhist butt plug. So speaking of which, before I get into what Vipassana is, what happens at one of these 10-day retreats and what my experiences have been like, and whether you should attend one, there's a burning question that I wanted to ask, and it came to me at my recent retreat. And that is, why is nobody talking about the Buddha's morbid obesity? I mean, this is a very visible feature of the Buddha. And I'm sitting there thinking that, yeah, beyond the obvious health risks, we're taking advice from this guy about craving? Really? Like when he said to follow the eightfold path, is he talking about the eight folds in his belly? What's going on here? And why is the Buddha always depicted this way? So a fun fact here right at the beginning, I looked into this. And it might surprise you. It surprised me. That fat Buddha that you commonly see in popular culture is not the historical Buddha. That's gnarly, right? Because that Buddha is everywhere. And the historical Buddha, the one that we think about when we talk about the Buddha, is Siddhartha Gautama, also called the Sakyamuni. And he is never depicted with a big belly. He's actually looking pretty emaciated and gaunt. The big-bellied Buddha is another Buddha, who is actually a Chinese monk nicknamed Budai. And even that might surprise you, to learn that there are actually many Buddhas, not just one. But that big-bellied laughing Buddha, Budai, he was depicted as having a big belly as a symbol of abundance and tolerance and forgiveness and love, as if to say he was just full of these qualities and he could stomach a lot. And in Chan Buddhist traditions, it's believed that Budai was actually a future Buddha, the Maitreya Buddha. And this Buddha is prophesized in all branches of Buddhism, from Theravada to Mahayana to Vajrayana. But we're drifting into technical details and getting ahead of ourselves a little bit here. So let me pull back and get us back on the path and talk first about Vipassana. And as I mentioned before, I've had 3 experiences, 2 sitting as a student, and 1 spent actually serving those who were sitting by preparing food for them and meditating for them. And I'll talk more about that later, but again, for the purposes of this podcast, I'm going to be focusing on what Vipassana is, what happens at one of these retreats, what my experiences have been, and whether you should attend one or not. And as part of that, I will need to give you some context into the basic premises of Buddhist philosophy in this tradition. And as a disclaimer, before we begin, keep in mind that I am not an authority on Buddhism. So everything I share is how I understand things. And given the nature of human perception and understanding, I may not get everything exactly right. So if these things interest you and you want to fact check anything I said, I encourage you to do your own research and feel free to write me in the comments and tell me I fucked up, and I will happily amend anything that I said here that was incorrect. But I'm going to try to keep it pretty basic and just cover some of the principles that you may know already. It's not going to be a deep dive because there won't be time for that. So I think I'll be able to keep us pretty honest, but I just wanted to note that here at the beginning. In brief, Vipassana is the meditation method that the Buddha taught, and it has its origins in the Theravada Buddhist tradition, which is the oldest of the 3 branches of Buddhism. And in the Pali language, Vipassana means insight. It's about perceiving phenomena as they are, not how we would like them to be. And with Vipassana, this is achieved by focusing on the breath and the sensations in the body to achieve wisdom experientially. And I'll speak more about all of this in a bit, but first, I think it's probably useful to back up and speak about Buddhism more generally. What is Buddhism? It's one of the world's major religions with more than 500 million adherents. Yeah, but it's also a philosophy, which means that one needn't be a Buddhist to practice Buddhism. Christians can practice Buddhism, Muslims can practice Buddhism, Hindus, Jews, atheists, Confucianists, Discordianists, even Pastafarians can practice Buddhism. And this is part of the beauty of Buddhism, in my opinion, is that it's inclusive. It's designed to help you here and now, while you're alive. Many religions, I'd say all of the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, have a huge emphasis on the afterlife. Whereas with Buddhism, it's more focused on here and now. And the main aim, I would say, if I had to paraphrase it, is that Buddhism is interested in eliminating harm and suffering for all beings. And it stresses that each individual must walk the path to liberation and enlightenment themselves. No one can walk it for you. And the Buddha, when he was asked to summarize the core of his teachings as simply as possible, he said, "Abstain from unwholesome actions, perform wholesome actions, and keep purifying your mind." He summarized everything into these 3 things, which is very concise. But if you're like me, you listen to that and you notice that it lends quite a bit of latitude for what wholesomeness and unwholesomeness mean here in this context. When I first heard it, I was wondering, well, okay, but what is wholesome and what is unwholesome? And this is why the Buddha taught morality, or sila, as it's called in Buddhism. And sila is the first of 3 of his core teachings. So let's dig into this a little bit because it's important. What is wholesome action in this context? You could think of wholesome action as any action, physical, vocal, or mental, that harms, hurts, or disturbs someone else's peace and harmony. And then what's wholesome action? Logically, it would be any action, physical, vocal, or mental, which supports or helps other beings live a peaceful, harmonious life. And in this moral code, like in other world traditions, one cannot kill, lie, engage in sexual misconduct, or take intoxicants. And you can think of this generally as, again, three. There's going to be a lot of threes, you'll notice. So you could think of this as three categories of right speech, right action, and right livelihood. And many of these things are very sensible and easy to understand, right? So with right speech, if someone speaks harsh words to you, or they slander you, or they gossip about you, you don't like this, right? It hurts you, it harms you in some way. And so, by this logic, you shouldn't do this to others, even if that's in retaliation for someone doing it to you. By the sheer virtue of doing it, you are perpetuating harm and misery, which would be a violation of this moral code. So, I mean, you see this in Jesus's teachings as well, right? Turn the other cheek, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So this is a similar reverberation of this sort of natural law. In terms of speech, this also applies to if someone lies to me or deceives me or tricks me. I don't like when this happens, right? When someone sells me penis enlargement pills and I take them, and the only thing that happens is I get a headache and diarrhea, but my little meat whistle still stays the same size, I don't feel good. I feel pretty bad. So I shouldn't do that to someone else. With right action, this extends behavior from the vocal level to the physical level, to the behavioral level. So you could think of this as if someone attacks you or kills someone close to you. You don't like this. This harms you. This is really bad. This causes grief and anger and the feelings of vengeance, maybe. So if you do these things in return, in retaliation, you are increasing harm and misery in the world. So you should not do these things, should not kill or attack anyone. If someone steals something that I worked hard for, or something that was very dear to me, maybe something that was irreplaceable due to sentimental value, this hurts me. So I shouldn't do it to someone else. If someone rapes me or someone that I care about, or commits adultery, I really don't like this. This is really painful. This is a lifetime of trauma, misery, and pain and suffering. So I shouldn't do it to someone else. Right? And this extends even to intoxicants. And you might think, well, yeah, intoxicants, is that really that bad? It's only harming me. But I mean, that's not true when you think about cigarettes, right? It's secondhand smoke. It's not true when you think about alcohol and a drunk driver kills a woman and her child crossing the street. The reason is that intoxicants agitate the mind and they make it confused. They make it lazy. They promote delusion and carelessness. And each of these things can lead to errors of judgment in speech or in action. And from that perspective, once you understand that, it makes sense that you would abstain from taking intoxicants as part of a moral code. It's funny, actually, on this point, the Buddha stressed that the most moral, the most wholesome thing that one can undertake to do is to gain mastery over their mind instead of being a slave to desires, impulses, ignorance, or other defilements of the mind. because this reduces harm to the self and others. And this was such an important idea to the Buddha that it leads to his next core teaching, which I'm going to get to in a moment. But before I get there, I just wanted to go back to right livelihood, which was the last part of sila. So we spoke about right speech and right action, but right livelihood is, what do you do in the world? Is your livelihood causing harm to any person, human or non-human? Does it harm the environment? Does it poison the air or water? Does it generate negativity or other impurities in the minds of others? Does it create desire, passion, anger, fear, shame, guilt? If the answer to any of these questions is yes, in Buddhist tradition, one should not do this. One should only work to make the world more harmonious and generate goodwill, love, compassion, and wisdom. And it gets tricky, right? Because maybe you aren't directly harming anyone. You're just working in a factory. And that factory happens to make weapons and munitions and bombs. You aren't technically killing anyone, but you are helping and encouraging others to kill. So your livelihood is resulting in the direct harm of other beings, and it's causing other humans to break their morality, their sila. And so this wouldn't be a right livelihood. And what's tricky about this, living in a modern, entangled world, a globalist, capitalist world that's mediated by transnational corporations, many of the things that we do, many of the jobs that we hold do perpetuate harm. And so we find ourselves in a bit of a predicament when it comes to sila and morality and how to live a just moral life within an economic system that's predicated on violence, extraction, exploitation, and harm. So that's not an answer that I have here in this podcast, but it's something to think about. And if you can identify that what you do does result in the harm of people, even indirectly, and you could find a way to reduce that harm, maybe change your profession or find ways to mitigate that harm, maybe by volunteering, donating, working with vulnerable populations. That's for you to decide, but it's something to think about. So back to the next core teaching of the Buddha, now that we've covered Sila. For the Buddha, achieving mastery over the mind is a key, it's foundational to this process. Because when you are in control of your mind, when you're focused, when you're aware of what you're doing, naturally you will begin to reduce harm to yourself and to others. And the Buddha's next core teaching is called samadhi. And samadhi is concentration of the mind. It's the cultivation of a calm, quiet, focused mind. When one examines the mind, they begin to see how wild the mind is. And this is one of those really striking things about meditation. Even if for a short period, like let's say 10 minutes, if you try and sit still for 10 minutes and only focus on your breath, the mind mutinies. It revolts. It resists and it cannot sit still. It reveals how weak and how deconditioned our minds are. And you could try this for yourself. You could pause this episode, sit still somewhere, close your eyes, and focus on your breath for 10 minutes, and I guarantee you it will be like trying to herd sheep. Thoughts will just be racing across your mind, jumping over the fences, going crazy, running around, shitting everywhere, knocking you into a lake, just completely unruly, unhinged, bestial mind. Some people call it monkey mind. Some people say, the mind is like a pinball machine, just whirring around, flashing, bouncing, making sounds. And this is the state of mind for most of us. So the Buddha, he prescribed 4 exercises, and I'm going to describe these in broad terms, which you can do to help strengthen the mind. The first is to look into the mind and examine it and see what vices it has. And when you identify those, you are to then work to rid yourself of them. Another exercise is that you look into the mind again, you examine it, and you discover that it does not have any serious vices. This is good. What you want to do then is ensure that you keep the mind pure and avoid inviting any in. The next exercise is to again look into the mind, examine it, and see what virtues it has. And once you identify them, you are not to be proud of these virtues, because as soon as you become prideful, this starts to create demons of elation and arrogance, and you start to unravel and erode those virtues. So your job is to identify them and work to keep and maintain them, but without clinging to them, without becoming prideful. And the last of these 4 exercises is to look into the mind and see what virtues it lacks, and then seek to cultivate those virtues. And to strengthen the mind, to aid you in that process, he advised enhancing awareness. And the way we build awareness is by focusing on the present moment. This is because the past is gone and the future has not yet come. So we stay with the present moment to be aware of the reality as it is. The Buddha advises focusing on the breath for this purpose. And in this tradition, it is key to observe the breath from moment to moment as it is, without modifying or adjusting the breath. You just accept the breath as it is, not as you'd like it to be. If the breath is fast, it's fast. If it's shallow, it's shallow. If it's deep, it's deep. You are just to remain aware of the breath as it is. It sounds really simple, but in practice, it is far, far more difficult. It's easier said than done. And the Buddha advised focusing on the breath because the object of your focus must be real, not imaginary, not something you conjure up like a mantra or a shape or a form or an image of a god or goddess. These things can absolutely concentrate the mind, but because they are imaginary or of your own creation, they cannot provide pure samadhi, at least according to the Buddha. And this is why he suggested that it should be something like respiration, which is a naturally arising phenomenon that we don't have full control over. And I wanted to pause here and note something about the breath, because the breath is this wonderful representation of the natural cyclical nature of the universe. The breath within it contains this natural wave. It emanates from a void space at the bottom of the breath, a spacious nothingness that's not empty but full of potential and generativity. Then the in-breath comes. It rushes in and there's this pleasant expansion and a taking in of what's out, right? What's outside suddenly passes through this liminal space and comes in. And you shift from this state of emptiness to fullness. And then at the top of the breath, there's another hollow, a pause, an echo of that first void before the cresting wave of the breath collapses into an exhale. And during the exhale, what's in spills out, and the body empties and contracts and loosens until it returns to that initial void space once again, and the cycle continues. So the breath becomes a bridge to deeper, subtler realities. It exists at this liminal threshold at the tips of the nostrils. And what's really trippy and weird about Vipassana is that once you begin to focus on this, as you begin to sensitize the area between the nostrils and your upper lip, you begin to become attuned to it. As you increase your awareness, you begin to realize the softness of the breath against the skin. And you notice subtler things about how the breath, when it's coming in, the air that you're pulling in from the space outside and around you, it's slightly cooler than the breath that's coming out, because that breath has already been warmed by the metabolic heat of your body. And so you start to enter into deeper relationship with the breath, deeper intimacy, a greater sensory appreciation for the breath. And you begin to realize that the breath is this magical, wondrous rhythm that's happening invisibly all the time. Often we're totally ignorant of it, but it is essential for our existence. And it's always moving. It's always going from the outside in and the inside out. And when we focus on the breath, this process of concentration helps us move from these larger, more gross sensations and perceptions to the more subtle and mysterious aspects of our perception and of reality as a whole. And the Buddha says that this is because focusing the mind sharpens it. It sensitizes it and makes it less dull. And it needs to be sharpened to be able to perceive reality as it is. And speaking of reality as it is, because what does that even mean? The Buddha knew 25 centuries ago that everything in the cosmos was made up of these small subatomic particles, and those times called kalapas. And these little vibrating wavelets were made mostly of empty space. This sounds familiar, right? The Buddha understood this long before modern science did. And this means that all solidity in the universe is illusory. And everything is just mostly empty space, flickering in and out of being trillions of times a second. And from this premise, he understood that the nature of everything in the universe is impermanent. Impermanence, which in the Pali language was called anicca, is a central tenet of Buddhism. Everything is always rapidly arising and passing away, in a constant state of change, including the sensations in our bodies, which enter into our awareness through 6 different sense doors: sight, sound, touch, taste, smell, and mind, which you can think of as thoughts, memories, and emotions. And at first this might seem strange to the Western mind, which typically only recognizes 5 senses. But this 6th sense is key to understanding something vital. You are not your thoughts. This might be difficult to accept at first. I know it was for me, because I remember thinking, what? I am thinking these things. They're my thoughts. They're generated by me. What do you mean I am not my thoughts? If there's one thing that I am more than anything else, it's my thoughts, feelings, and memories. If you take those away from me, who am I? Once you lose these things, you're not you anymore. And it took me a long time to understand that I was still ferociously clinging to the idea of a persistent I, or self. Because in the West, we over-identify or overattach to our sensations. We say things like, I'm cold, or I'm sad, and this is incorrect. When we're feeling cold, we're not cold, we are aware of the temperature of the air around us. And depending on its temperature in relationship to the temperature of our body, we evaluate it as being cold or hot or warm. When you hear a bird or see fire, you don't say that I'm bird or I'm fire. So why do we do it with thoughts and touch? I would say that's because we overattach to physical and mental sensations that we perceive as happening within the body, instead of as perceiving them as passing through the body. Thoughts and physical sensations are just sensations. Like all other sensations, they are temporary and they pass through us like clouds passing through the sky. In Buddhism, there is no self because the self is always changing, as I mentioned earlier, because of this concept of anicca, which means impermanence. In Buddhism, this concept of no self is called anatta, and it's another core principle of Buddhism. Because of anicca, because of the impermanence of everything, you are also impermanent. Which means from moment to moment, there is no persistent I or persistent self. Imagine you are sitting on the bank of a river and watching the river flow. Every moment, that river is changing. The water you saw a moment ago is gone. One wave appears here and disappears there, and a new one arrives where the old one was. It's in a constant state of flux. It's why we have that saying, you can't step into the same river twice. And you are like that river. You are a constant flow of mind and body. And the aim of concentrating the mind, or samadhi, is to penetrate deep into the mind with the third core teaching of Buddha, which is panna, or wisdom. The goal is to purify the mind of its impurities at the deepest level, experientially. And this is because you are the only one who can generate your insights and your wisdom. When you're thirsty, someone else can't drink for you and quench your thirst. And similarly, we can't rely on listening to or reading about the teachings of other enlightened beings or using our own analytical mind to arrive at wisdom. It doesn't work this way. It needs to be experienced directly. I can't read a book about swimming or about riding a bike or listen to someone talk about it and think that I know how to swim. This is something that needs to happen experientially. I need to get on the bike. I need to see what it's like and struggle to find balance. I need to fall a few times. I need to learn about speed through my body. The same with swimming. And the reason that wisdom needs to be experienced directly is because when we intellectually try to understand these things, they remain only at the surface level. Back to the example about swimming or riding a bike, you might understand a lot about the physics of swimming or of riding the bike, but until you get on these things, you haven't developed these experiential, lived wisdoms. And there's a funny anecdote from the course teacher, S.N. Cuenca, where he talks about someone sitting at a talk, and it's a Dhamma talk about Buddhism, and they're feeling enlightened and liberated from the shackles of craving and aversion and ignorance, and everything makes perfect sense, and it's so beautiful, and the person has so many deep insights and understands on the mental level how they're suffering, and they feel pleasant feelings about this because now things make sense and they see the world in a different light. And the lecture ends and they go outside. And once they're in the hall, they're looking for their slippers that they took off to go into the room where shoes weren't allowed. And they can't find them. The shoes are missing. And the person proceeds to start crying and shouting, "Oh no, where are my shoes? We took my shoes. You took my shoes. Those are mine." And they're clinging to the idea of their shoes and grieving their loss and accusing everyone and lashing out and just making the whole hall miserable. And this isn't the behavior of an enlightened being. And that's because they weren't an enlightened being. They had just understood something at the mental level. And the Buddha was urging us to go deeper, to go down into the deepest levels, the behavioral levels, the experiential levels. So sila, samadhi, and panna, all of these three core principles are interconnected, and you need each of them to reach full liberation. Full liberation you can think about as the freedom from suffering or misery, which is another central point inside Buddhism, which you may be familiar with. The word that they use is dukkha, which you can think about as suffering. And in life, there is suffering, right? This is unavoidable. Because due to the impermanent nature of all things, we cling to good, pleasant feelings. And we develop aversion and hatred of unpleasant sensations and feelings. In Buddhism, there are three causes of all mental defilements: desire, which you could think of as attachment or craving or clinging or grasping. The other is aversion, or hatred or anger. And finally, ignorance of the truth. And the Buddha taught that we should not crave pleasant sensations because they are impermanent and they will pass. You can't be happy all the time. But nor should we be so sad and angry when unpleasant things happen, because those things too will pass. So he stressed the importance of remaining equanimous and in accepting the reality of the moment as it is, without reacting to it with craving or aversion. And now you may be thinking, as I was, that this sounds like a kind of boring, dead life. It sounds like a bad deal, like it's so disciplined and detached. Where's the zest of life and the exhilaration and the intensity? What's life without desiring things and feeling the full spectrum of feelings? And I think these are good questions, but the truth is that the Buddha didn't say you can't have preferences. He didn't say that you can't hope for things or feel the vicissitudes of life's splendor. He just said that we shouldn't get caught up in reactivity. We shouldn't be devastated when we don't get what we want. And we also shouldn't be devastated or throw tantrums when something happens to us that we didn't want to happen. And there was actually a funny exchange that I witnessed while I was serving, if you'll permit me a short aside here. When you're serving, you sit at the front of the meditation hall. So you're beside the teacher. I'll tell you about serving more in a moment, but right now you just need to know that the servers are seated within earshot of the teacher and the students who, at the end of the day, have an opportunity to come and ask the teacher a brief question. And when I was serving, I was sitting there and I was within earshot. And, you're sitting there with your eyes closed and you're meditating and you're trying not to eavesdrop. But I'm sitting there and I'm listening, and the instructor was German. And the student who came up to ask the question was also German. And the reason that I started listening to this conversation was that I realized that both the teacher and the student weren't speaking to each other in their native language, in German. They were speaking in English. And I thought that this was funny because for sure I thought that they would be speaking in German. But luckily, they were speaking in English, and maybe the whole reason of that was for this memory. But it was really comical because just to try to, I know we haven't spoken about what happens at these retreats yet, and we haven't really even spoken about Vipassana yet, but we're at the conclusion of the basic things I wanted to teach you about Buddhism. When you're in these retreat centers, you're not speaking to anyone for days. So to speak to someone is a big deal. And usually you reserve the right to question the teacher if you are going through some struggle or something is really difficult or you're confused about something and it's become an obstacle for you and you can't focus or it's really distracting and it's hindering your process. So you would go to the teacher to see if they could offer some guidance or give you a tip or clarify something. And so this was the moment for this person to do it. And they go and they sit in front of the teacher and I'm going to do terrible German impersonation. So forgive me for this, but I think it just makes it funnier. So I hear the student speaking to the teacher and he's saying,
let's say I am in a bakery. It's the morning time and I'm very hungry and I'm craving a bagel. I'm standing in line thinking about the bagel and I get to the front of the line and I order a bagel. What's wrong with this? Why can't I want this bagel? This should not be a problem.
And then the teacher is like,
oh, of course it's normal and natural to want a bagel. It's okay to want a bagel. You can have preferences. You can enjoy the bagel. But you shouldn't be angry when you don't get the bagel.
and it was just this really funny interaction to me because of all of the things that you could be thinking about. You're thinking about standing in line ordering bagels and whether or not within the Buddhist framework it would be permissible to be craving and desiring this bagel. And it always stayed with me because it was such a funny, bizarre exchange to be listening to two Germans speaking in English about baked goods. Because anyone who's lived in Germany knows that Germans have great bread. So I found it funny that there were Germans talking about bread in the context of Buddhism. But the moral of the story is that you can have preferences. And it's normal and natural and fine. But don't be angry when they don't have the bagel you want. So we've covered some of the very basics of Buddhism here. We spoke about the nature of impermanence and suffering and the concept of anatta or no self. We spoke about sila and samadhi and panna. We spoke about craving and aversion and ignorance and how all of these create defilements in the mind that lead to suffering. And all of this stuff are the core teachings of the Buddha, which are also called Dhamma, which can be thought of as a universal natural law. These are truths about the nature of existence. We spoke about focusing the mind on the breath to increase awareness. And now that we have these basic concepts down, now we can move into the process of meditation, which is called Vipassana. And again, I mentioned threes. Vipassana is broken down into 3 parts. The first part is anapana. And this is what you do for the first 4.5 or so days. This is the first aspect of the meditation technique that you learn. It is the way to calm and quiet the mind, focusing it. And during anapana, you are to focus on your breath as it is, not as you'd like it to be. So you're just observing it. It is how it is. You don't try to change it. And the idea is that the smaller the area that you can focus the mind on, the sharper it becomes. So most people are focusing on the small area in the center of their upper lip, between their lip and their nostrils. The smaller, the better. So I'm focusing on my little beef whistle. this whole time, because the smaller, the better. And it's really true. Focusing on a small area really does sharpen the mind. I remember my first time I was able to focus on what felt like a razor's edge, like a hair, just of the air gently touching that area of my lip, going in and out like a thread. It was surreal how crazy. And I didn't know that my senses could be that dialed in. So that's what you're doing the first few days. Just breathing and waking up that area that's between your nose and your upper lip. It's like your little Hitler mustache area. And then the next thing that you do, starting on day 4.5, that's where you really begin developing panna, or wisdom. And this is Vipassana, right? This is the technique. What you do is you scan your body from the top of your head to the tips of your toes, taking care to observe the sensation on every inch of your body. And then when you get to the toes, you move back up to the head, and you just keep repeating this process over and over and over. And as you're doing it, what you notice is that from moment to moment, there are different sensations across the body, even in the same place. Sometimes that's not true. Sometimes you'll go through the same part of the body that you were in, and the sensation is very similar, or it's numb, or you can't feel anything in that area. And it depends. But the constant there is change, generally. And back to this rule of threes, there are 3 types of experiences that you'll pass through as you scan the body. The first is large, gross, solid sensations, or these dead, blind areas throughout the body. The second are uniform, subtle sensations throughout the body. And the third is a mix. So you might have some parts of the body with these really gross, thick, solid sensations, and other parts of the body that have these more uniform, subtle sensations. It's even possible to have both on the same part of your body simultaneously. This happened to me on my most recent experience, and I was surprised by it. But the important thing here is to not get attached to any of these feelings or sensations, and not to be avoidant or aversive to any of them. And this is the whole task of the experience, is to be aware and equanimous, to be aware of what you're feeling, feel these sensations, whether they are these thick, solid, large, gross sensations, or these more pleasant, subtle, buzzing sensations. And you're just doing that over and over and over again. And your aim is to not generate any new sankaras. And this is a term that I haven't discussed yet in this episode because it requires a lengthy introduction, which I don't want to go into, given we've already spoken about a lot of terms and concepts which may be new to you. So to give you just an abbreviated, short definition of what a sankara is, you can think of a sankara as a reaction. So normally things are happening. You have something that comes in, a sound, you hear it, it enters through your sense door of your ear. Then your mind recognizes, okay, a sound is happening. Then the brain starts telling you, okay, it starts to evaluate and decide, okay, this is a good sound, this is a bad sound. And then you have a reaction. This is the condensed version of what's happening. You have some kind of neutral stimulus. And then based on your history, based on your stories, you come up with a narrative about it. Is it good or bad? And then you have a reaction to it. You either cling to it because it's pleasant, or you shy away from it because it's unpleasant. And in simple terms, that's what's happening. And it is very easy, and I'll talk about that later when I talk about my experiences, to fall victim to reacting to what's happening in the body. And we're doing it all the time, and we're ignorant of it. And this is what's manufacturing our misery effectively. As we accumulate these reactions, these sankaras, they get bigger and deeper, and they take longer to clear and clean because they're basically defilements, they're impurities that cause suffering. And at the end of your life, there's like the sum total, the grand sankara that you've been building your whole life. And at the point of death, this kind of echoes into your next incarnation. And that goes into this whole other topic of past and future lives and incarnations. And do you incarnate as a human or a non-human? Are you in a hell realm? Are you in a God realm? All of that is beyond the scope of this podcast, but just know that this is the process through which you are generating these sankaras, through your reactions to things, often invisibly. And the purpose of this meditation is to surface them, to bring them to your awareness so you see what you're doing. And then once you start to see it, you can hopefully start to get some control and mastery over not having that reaction and changing the habit pattern of your mind. So those are the first two parts of Vipassana. Anapana, Vipassana, focusing on developing wisdom, focusing on the experiences in your body, scanning from head to toe about what's real and what's happening at that moment. And then the final part is metta. And metta can be translated as selfless love or friendliness or loving kindness. And the key here is that all beings are deserving of loving kindness, whether they're big or small, saintly or wicked, visible or invisible, human or non-human, people who return the shopping cart and people who don't. Everyone. In Buddhism, they even believe that meditating in the same room and practicing metta over and over can energetically charge the space with feelings of peace and compassion and softness. It's kind of like the opposite of smoking in a room, right? If you're smoking cigarettes in a room, have you ever been in one of those rooms, like an old hotel where they used to smoke, or maybe you were like me and your father's friends were chain smoking alcoholics, and you would go over to their apartments and everybody in the home would be smoking cigarettes, and you would notice that the walls were kind of yellow. And not only were the teeth of these people stained, but everything was this weird yellow, and your eyes kind of burned, and you would have a cough after being there too long. The air is stained and noxious somehow. So the opposite thing happens when you're in a room where people have been meditating and practicing loving kindness meditations, where somehow the room is brighter, it's more spacious, it's more tranquil and suffused with love. And it kind of feels that way when you're practicing this meditation at the end, and you're only permitted to practice that if you haven't generated feelings of ill will or negativity towards yourself or anyone, and your body is in a position to channel love and goodwill. Because if you're having crazy discomfort and pain in your body and it's not in peace, effectively you could think of yourself as becoming a sort of like tuning fork, where you are trying to attune to the vibrations of love, harmony, equanimity, beauty, all of these good things. And you need the body to be not hollowed out for it, but it needs to be prepared. It needs to be in the right configuration so that you could emanate those things. You could reverberate them out. And you're supposed to actually feel that. You could feel this pleasant buzzing, maybe these uniform sensations in your body are all vibrating, and you're like a singing bowl just there, spilling this vibration out into the universe around you. Like, this is what you're doing there. So it's actually really beautiful. And those are the three pieces of Vipassana meditation. So now that we've covered these basic Buddhist concepts, the Buddhist core teachings, and what Vipassana looks like as a meditative practice, now I need to describe what the course is like. Because at the course, these courses last 10 days, but it's really more like 11, because you get there on day 0 in the evening, and they explain some things to you, you ask questions, you take an oath, you prepare, you stop speaking, And then for 10 days, you're doing this process. And then the morning of the 11th day, you leave. And when you arrive on day 0, you fill out a long answer questionnaire. And they ask you questions about your mental health, your current and past drug use. You have to surrender your phone. And you have to sign an agreement that you won't leave the course before it's over. And then you don't speak to anyone for 10 days. So it's pretty intense. And that's how it starts, right? But the intensity increases because you realize that the schedule itself is pretty gnarly. You wake up at 4 a.m. and you start meditating by 4:30. So you're meditating from 4:30 to 9:30 p.m. And of course, you have some breaks in between. Breakfast is at 6:30, lunch is at 11, and then you'll have like a short tea break in the afternoon. But from 11 on, you're fasting. So there's no dinner. So you're roughly meditating 10 hours a day. You stop eating after 11. And at best, you're getting 6 hours of sleep a night. And one aspect of this, one reason for this, is because there are 10, not 3 this time, and I'm not going to go into them, but there are 10 mental perfections that you're practicing. One of them, the first one, is renunciation. The other one is sila, actually, is morality. Some of them are tolerance, truthfulness, wisdom, equanimity, generosity. But renunciation is a key one. And so you are renouncing certain comforts. You are renouncing physical comforts. You are renouncing sleep, renouncing food. And doing so is a core aspect of this monkish lifestyle that you are adopting for these 11 days. I remember the first time that I attended a course, I felt like I had voluntarily entered into a 10-day prison sentence. Even though I had been meditating, I was doing 2-hour-long sits in preparation for the retreat. I was still unprepared for the intensity. I remember wanting to run away. I was thinking, get me the fuck out of here. I was thinking, what the fuck am I doing here? Why did I do this? What am I trying to prove? And I think this was on maybe the light tremor. The gentle storms probably came on day 3 or 4, but the real storms came on day 5 or 6. Those are the real challenging days. That's, I would say, when I've seen people leave is generally around that time. But in those first few days, I felt these moments of profound clarity and bliss, like I had taken a light dose of MDMA. I didn't even know that it was possible to focus on breathing, on just my breath, for these sustained periods of time. I wouldn't have a thought. I'd be sitting there just breathing and focused on my Hitler mustache, not thinking anything for like minutes. First, it was 1 or 2 minutes because the instructor invites you to do that. He says, see if you can focus on 1 or 2 minutes with having no thoughts. And if you can, keep extending it. So when I first heard it, I thought 1 or 2 minutes without having any thoughts, that's not even possible. And then when it happened, I couldn't believe it. It was magical. It was mind-boggling. And so I was stretching it out. I was like 7 minutes, 15 minutes. I don't know how long I was going, but sometimes the meditation would be over and I'd be shocked because my sense of time was completely distorted and warped and dilated. And this was really magical to me. It was very eye-opening because you can't achieve something like that. And that's something I'll talk about when I guess I'm already talking about my experience, so I could talk about it now, but it was one of the realizations I had, which was you can't easily get to these deeper levels of meditation when you're speaking to people. It's not possible. I mean, maybe if you're enlightened, maybe if you've been meditating for decades, you have enough continuity of your practice where you can sustain that. You can take it with you, even when you're out and about doing things, when you're eating, when you're walking, when you're doing tasks. You can have that mental awareness that's really fine-tuned and honed. But for the average person, especially someone just going to a 10-day course, you're not going to be able to achieve that level of depth in your practice. This is a lifelong devotional thing. But being in that space that's designed to help facilitate these type of experiences where you're not speaking to anyone, you don't have anything coming in except the daily discourses and the instructions from the teacher. Your mind really does begin to quiet down, and you realize how much any phrase that's spoken to you or that you say, any utterance, just echoes and reverberates through the mountains and canyons of your mind. That strange topography, they're just vibrating out there for days. It's terrible because this recent experience I had right before the workshop, I had released this Epstein episode. That's maybe 2 episodes back right now. And I was knee deep in some of the most disturbing, unsettling, horrific, inhuman events. And I was researching all this stuff, and it was just, I didn't realize how much I had steeped my mind in that until I went to this retreat. And I saw that it took me days. I'm not even exaggerating. It must have taken 4 days. In fact, it took 10 days because they never quite stopped. They only lessened and got more feeble, and they weakened in their frequency and intensity. But Epstein was just in my head, and I was like, I'm at a Vipassana retreat, trying to calm my mind and focus and channel love and positivity and, be a force for good in the world. And I have this poisonous, parasitic prattling in my head of these things that are coming from Epstein. And it made me realize how we are so saturated and overwhelmed. We are just constantly, relentlessly bombarded with information and scrolling social media, taking these things in. I don't think the human mind is designed to absorb or witness the amount of information and the nature of the things that we see in a given day. Because the news funnels us these things that are highly disturbing, scandalous, sensational, crazy things, wars, public executions on the streets of America, children being blown apart in Gaza. Awful, terrible things. And this is something that you're like scrolling while you're taking a shit on your bathroom break before you have a big work presentation. So you have to bracket and compartmentalize and like just put that somewhere in your energetic register. And like that's just in there. It's like a little seed that's been planted that's growing and doing things and affecting you, producing cortisol. I noticed how deep these things penetrate into our psyches and into our somatic structure. But I'm going to save that for at the end of this conversation. I just kind of got riled up to speak about that right now. What I wanted to speak about, or what I was speaking about, was I was amazed during my first time because I had been practicing. I was prepping myself. I was clearing my mind already, helping to drain it every day, helping to digest those things that are in there and let them out or metabolize them somehow. I was able to achieve deeper states of concentration on my first experience. My mind felt so still. It was like a clear mountain lake. And it was funny because that first time I was going through some weird shit with my balls. My right testicle, to be precise, I had gone to a urologist the day before the course. And I had to explain to the urologist that I was going to go to a place where I'd be in the middle of nowhere. There would be no medical facilities on site. And I would have to stay there for 10 days. And I was having shooting pains in my ball. I didn't even want the doctor to touch it. She's touching it, and I feel like an animal, like a dog, just like shaking with trepidation and like, please don't touch this. And she's like, yeah, I think maybe there's an infection, maybe not. It's hard to say. They did some tests, but I was like, I'm not going to receive these tests because I'm leaving tomorrow. They're not going to be ready by tomorrow. She said no, but they did the tests anyway. They gave me some medicine, and they said, yeah, it should be fine, but we really don't know because we don't know what the results of the test are. So I was at Vipassana, not able to talk to anybody, going through psychic turmoil, physical agony in my, not just in my balls, because the physical pain that you experience without having any additional thing that you're dealing with is already excruciating. But I had this extra treat, this extra little benefit. And I'm sitting there having to deal with the stress and looping paranoid thoughts and hypochondria that I am going to lose my testicles from an infection because I'm so stubborn that I'm going through a meditation where I'm sitting still all day and Zeus is just hurling lightning bolts at my fucking nutsack. And I'm there with a stuttering scrotum, leaping up. I was literally leaping up out of my seat at points. Imagine a quiet meditation hall where you just hear breathing, the occasional cough, an even less frequent sneeze. And then you would suddenly hear somebody go, because that's what would happen. I would be wincing from the pain. When it came, it was like, I can't even describe it to you. It was an ordeal. And that was only the pain in the ball. The pain that begins to accumulate in your body when you're sitting in a rigid posture for that long is difficult to describe. It is a prodigious amount of pain. I would guess that it's probably similar to what it must feel like to be giving yourself a bed sore. People in hospitals get bed sores when they're lying down for an extended period on one side of their body. You know, let's say you're in a coma or you're incapacitated somehow, you're immobilized. You need to be turned. You need to be moved in that bed, because if you aren't, just from pressure on one space over time, I don't know what the mechanism is, but what it felt like when I was there was that there must be some type of acidic buildup in that place, because sitting down onto my sit bones felt like acid, like battery acid. I don't know how to describe it, because I would sit on a chair, which means I wasn't on a soft cushion. And even being on a cushion, I'm aware, becomes excruciating. But being on a hard, unforgiving, unyielding surface, sitting still for that many days, it's a unique pain that I can't describe. I remember just horrific feelings of fear and aversion just thinking of sitting down on that chair again for an hour or two. And at the same time, the muscles in my back and neck and shoulders and legs and hips were all just a hellish tangle of knotted agony. Yeah, physically, it is intense. And all of this physical pain begins to precipitate psychological pain. So as I was saying, you have this constant sense of aversion to wrestle with. And your whole goal is to not react to it, right? So you are in considerable pain. You are in torturous pain. And you have to really take every ounce of focus and concentration and calm and be equanimous and not react and just accept that this hurts and pain is unavoidable in life, and really find a way within yourself to accept it in that moment because you realize the magic of this experience is in those moments, you realize that you are the only one who can save you, and you are the only one who can doom you. And you are dooming your, like I was. I was dooming myself. I was really creating misery and suffering for myself, thinking, I don't want to do this. Why am I doing this? Am I going to do something irreversible to my body? Because the reason I was sitting on a chair was because I had suffered a spinal fracture. I broke my spine some time ago when I was living in San Francisco, and my whole back, like the mid back, the lower back, the hips, it's all fucked up from that. So I can't sit cross-legged on the floor for extended periods of time. My legs go numb. The pain in my body is just overwhelming. So I was sitting on this chair, and the mind is very clever at using things like fear to get you to do something. So I would start fearing that maybe I'm cutting off circulation in my legs because I haven't felt them for an hour and they're completely numb, and maybe I'm going to get a blood clot and it's going to go to my heart or my lungs and kill me. And so all of these body, fears that are linked to the body start to come up. And this is what they say happens during this process. You are starving the sankaras that are there. So if you think about it, think about starting a fire. You have a fire going, it's burning. If you keep putting more wood on top of the fire, it keeps burning. It'll be burning bigger. If you keep feeding it fuel, the fire will continue to burn. You can think about you as an organism. If you stop putting food into your body, over time, you will die. And so these sankaras function similarly. You have a storehouse of sankaras inside of you. And when you aren't reacting to them, when you're sitting there being equanimous, accepting the situation, not multiplying your misery or deepening your suffering, these things start to starve. And when they get hungry, they try to catch your attention. So as you're releasing these sankaras, they want more. They want more fuel. That flame is becoming desperate. So it will try to entice you and get you to react. And fear is a great way to do that, at least for me. I noticed that in me, I don't have so many problems with craving or vices or things like this, but aversion is strong in me. And I realized that aversion and grasping are two different sides of the same coin. So I know that they're connected because whenever you are grasping for something, you are being aversive to something else. And whenever you are being aversive to something, you are grasping for something. There's always this kind of like equal and opposite movement, right? So if you're cold and you're shivering and you're saying, oh, I hate this. It's so cold. I'm so miserable. You are expressing aversion to the cold, but you are simultaneously clinging towards ideas of warmth and comfort and not feeling like this, right? So anything that you are being aversive to or clinging towards, you're also doing the opposite. So they're connected is what I'm saying. And when you're in this situation, your mind is testing you. Your body is testing you. It is giving you these little tools to see what you can do with them. How will you react? Here are these sensations for you to use to either unburden yourself of these sankaras and move towards liberation, or to burden yourself with sankaras and move further away from liberation. So it's a really fascinating process to move through experientially because you can feel it happening. You can watch it from an intellectual level and experience it on a lived somatic level where you are getting the wisdom and experience to notice how these things work. Because the most striking thing for me, and this is going to sound like bullshit, but the most bizarre, perplexing, mystifying thing that happens, and it's happened every time, is that you can really see how these painful, thick, solid, gross sensations, the feeling of acid all over your sit bones and ass, as all of the muscles in your lower back, upper back, all around your spine, hips, joints are just aching and solid and screaming. And you have to slowly make your way down to your sit bones from the top of your head. What I found inexplicable was when I would put my awareness and focus into that painful area, I would watch, dumbfounded, as the pain went from, let's say, like a 10 or 11, where it feels like you need to jump up out of that chair and just go jump in an ice bath. It would go from that to like a 2 or a 0 sometimes, where that thick solidified sensation would evaporate into these little uniform subtle sensations, where it would just be this vacuous, spacious, light emptiness full of like buzzing or vibrating. I don't know how it happens or why, but it is a strange experience. So you get to have these little insights where you don't just take the Buddha at his word. You don't just take the teacher at his word. You are discovering for yourself, there's an expression they have, come and see. You find out for yourself what the nature of sensation is and how all sensations are kind of neutral. We just assign a value to them. We assign good or bad, and then we react accordingly. And how if you can start to undo that and untether that coupling, you can free yourself from a lot of suffering. And you're the only one who can do it. And this is what it teaches you. So after all of that, after I completed that first experience, I remember having this newfound sense of ease and acceptance in my life. I felt calmer. I was less triggered by things that would normally trigger me. I was meditating for an hour in the morning and an hour before bed for months after the course. And I felt the changes in my life. They were subtle, but they were palpable. They were real. And then some time passed, maybe a year, maybe 2 years, and I served. And this was back in October. And serving is very different than sitting. When you're serving, you're only sitting maybe 3-ish hours a day, maybe a little more, maybe 4 maximum. And the rest of that time, you are serving either the facility or the students. In my case, I was serving the students directly. I was in the kitchen the whole time. And I remember the feeling of feeling exploited at the beginning. For the first maybe 24 to 48 hours, I felt anger. I felt aversion. This is my pattern. I felt that this was unjust. This was unfair. This wasn't the way it should be. How do they expect us to be working 16 hours straight? And I've never worked in a kitchen before. How can I be expected to be fast and on time? And so many people are counting on us. There's 100 people here that we have to feed and care for who are suffering and working so hard. And if I'm burning their fucking beans in the kitchen, like, this is too much. The stress was overwhelming. And I felt so much anger that, again, I had to find a way inside of myself to confront this, accept it, and change that anger to, this is the psychological version of what I was talking about, where you have this burning acidic feeling and you bring your attention to it and see, okay, I'm angry. Okay, I have these stories about how this should be, but I need to accept this and bring my attention through it and maybe have that break apart into smaller, more subtle particles where I have more space to move and breathe and deal with this. And that worked, and that happened. And I shifted from having all these reservations about the process to really feeling, again, deep feelings of joy, love, satisfaction, purpose, meaning, contentment, fulfillment. It was really powerful where I don't know if I ever had this sense of just being selflessly serving someone with my entire being. Because when we would be cooking and doing all of this and preparing and cleaning, in between that, you're going to these meditation sessions 3 times a day. And you conclude the day with a meditation session too, an extra one that the students don't do. And in all of those sessions, you're meditating, having your own experience, but you are trying to actively channel metta, actively channel loving kindness and compassion, and be like a kind of balm or a salve on these people who are struggling in pain, because you know what it's like to be in the other seat. You know what they're going through. You know how hard it is. And so knowing that you're helping these people, even if one person in that pool of 100 people leaves with their life changed in a positive way, you enabled that. You contributed to that. You helped this person invisibly, thanklessly. They can't even see you, because at these retreats, you're not even allowed to make eye contact with people because that's a form of communication. So you avoid eye contact. And yeah, that selfless serving, to me, it's one of these 10 mental perfections that I mentioned earlier. And I think, to me, it's maybe the most, I don't know what the most important is, but to me, on that experience serving, I felt it was the most important, which is dana, generosity, donation, giving something. Ultimately, it's being in service. And I felt so, it was so rewarding. And they say this too. In the philosophy, they say that generosity and being in service and helping others is a way to kind of accelerate your path towards liberation, which I'll talk about in a moment when I get to the reflections. But yeah, maybe I'll just share my final experience here with the most recent one, and then I'll get to these reflections and we can talk about whether this is right for you and then close out. But the most recent experience, I was sitting for the second time, and it was very different than I expected. I should have known that this would be different, because in community building, this group process that I'm a facilitator in, we take special care to reach out to participants who are attending their second workshop. And we try to caution them about the experience. We advise them not to compare their experience to the previous one. We explain that each workshop is different, and it isn't like you just pick up where you left off in the previous one. You could imagine it like the behavior of some monks, where they make these elaborate sand mandalas. Beautiful, intricate. And upon completion, they just destroy it and wipe it away and start again. It's like this. And I didn't realize it, but of course, Vipassana would be like this too. But somehow I neglected to connect the dots, and I spent so much mental energy comparing this sitting to my first one, even when I realized I was doing it. And that was the most twisted part for me that really was spinning me out, because I was aware, I knew that I was doing it. I saw, hey, I shouldn't compare. This is like community building. I recognize it. It's a different experience. Let go of whatever happened in the first one. And I couldn't. There was this rift between knowing the thing intellectually and being able to address it at this deep level of my mind. Somehow I kept comparing. I was getting frustrated that I wasn't having enough subtle sensations in the body. Like, I kept getting stuck in these blind areas, or these thick, chunky, painful areas that were going dead to me. And it's hard to describe. Like, imagine, to give you a sense of what it's like and why it started to frustrate me, you're trying to get from the top of your head to the bottom of your toes, and up and down and up and down. And it's not a race. It's not like how many times you do it indicates how adept you are, how good your practice is. It's nothing like that. But being in that kind of rhythm helps keep the mind focused, I found. If you start to slow down and get stuck, the mind has an outlet. It has an opportunity to distract itself. It has a way to run away and derail you. And so there's something important about moving. And I think this is the whole reason that they instruct you to move. They say if you do find a blind spot, sit there for a minute or two, because they don't want you to start to get lost in these blind spots. But what would happen to me, it would be like you're canoeing. Let's say you're in a boat, you have a paddle, and suddenly the water around you starts freezing and you're stuck. You can't move. And you have to spend a minute or two chiseling yourself out around the canoe with a chisel, and then you move forward a little bit. And then again, you find that, fuck, you're frozen again. You have to get the chisel out. And you're trying to get down this stream or this river, wherever you are, this part of water that you're moving through, and you keep getting stuck. So you get the feeling like you're in traffic. You have somewhere to go. There's somewhere you're arriving at, but you can't get there because you have to keep, instead of paddling, you have to keep fucking chiseling yourself out of the ice that keeps forming all around you. And this is what it was like. It was like being in traffic. Traffic would clear, you drive 5 minutes, make a turn, and find a new traffic jam. And somehow my mind just wasn't prepared to deal with that. And I would start getting angry that I'm stuck. I would start thinking, oh no, don't be angry about this. Like, you're going to make new sankaras. You're making new reactivity. Be peaceful, be equanimous. And then my mind would tell me to shut the fuck up. I am not equanimous. I am not peaceful. My anger is authentic. Why are you denying the reality of this present moment? And then I would go, oh, fuck. What do I do now? Like, I see that I'm angry. My reaction to the anger is an aversive reaction, which is generating a sankara and generating more anger from the body. Oh no. And then I would just get stuck in this spiraling loop where I'd be angry about being angry, and then I'd be angry at my own anger in response to being angry. And it was a nightmare. And it was really exhausting physically and mentally. And yeah, I couldn't seem to free myself on an experiential level from the suffering I was causing. And maybe that was the lesson I needed to learn this time. But I don't know. I still don't know. I'm still integrating the process. But another deep conundrum, a huge dilemma that I found was when I was going through all of that and I was telling myself, okay, be equanimous, be calm, be peaceful. This is okay. You're not trying to get anywhere. You're just trying to observe the nature and the reality of this moment as it is. If it's hard, it's hard. If you're angry, you're angry. If you're stuck, you're stuck. Fucking accept it. Like, it's okay. But somehow I couldn't. And when I got to that point, I felt broken by it in a way. And through this shattering of myself, through this kind of like dissolution of fracturing of the self, I felt that, okay, maybe I've achieved some acceptance of this. I feel more at peace with this. If this is the situation, it's the situation. And I was just scanning like that. And days were going by where I would have these moments of, okay, I accept it. And then I would oscillate between, no, I don't accept it. I don't want it to be this way. I came here to get deeper into the practice and I feel like I'm regressing. This is bad. And I would be swinging through these extremes. But then this really strong, concerning thought came to me, the sensation, which was, and I'm going to pose it to you as a question, but it was a felt experience then that I was able to give words to later. What's the difference between acceptance and resignation? And this really fucking unsettled me because it was impossible for me to know. I was sitting there thinking, am I accepting the situation, or have I resigned myself to just mechanically scanning from top to bottom, just like an automaton, like a robot, just to get myself through this really difficult experience? Because there were 2 moments in particular where I thought I was losing my fucking mind. They were deeply psychedelic. It felt like a bad mushroom trip where I was just like out of control. I realized I had no control. And I know one of the things that I practice in my life is surrender to uncertainty. Like the way I live my life, it generally doesn't have much certainty. I live in a van. We don't know where we're going to be. I don't have any income. Like it's pretty tumultuous and chaotic. And we've been doing that for years. And I feel like I've settled into that and I can respect this kind of uncertainty and not know what we're going to do the next day. But somehow in this moment, I felt like I would, my reality was just melting around me. I didn't know what was what, which way was up, which way was down. I couldn't trust the sensations in my body. Like just to give you a sense of how the mental phenomena and physical phenomena connect. When I was having this doubt of, am I resigned? Have I just given up? Am I defeated by this? Or am I really equanimous? Am I really accepting this? I started to have problems discerning whether the sensations I was having in my body were actually real, or was I projecting them? Was I manifesting these things and manufacturing really feeble sensations so that I would avoid getting so stuck in this ice water? And I couldn't tell, because these sensations that you're having are often very, very subtle. It could be the sensation of heat, could be a gentle buzzing or tingling, could be itching, could be vibration. It could be a sense that's even hard to name. It's like there's not a word for the kind of thing that you're feeling. It's something else. And they can be so subtle and other times so clear that for me in that moment, a lot of my sensations became very feeble, very faint, very foggy, like misty. This is how I would describe it. Like it felt like a fog, like a very gentle thing where I couldn't really quite see if it was actually there or what's there. And they were fleeting, right? Because you realize that all sensations are flickering in and out of existence trillions of times a second that you can't even count or be aware of, really. And maybe you felt some sensation 1 second, and then the same second you're just hovering there, feeling into it, and it's gone. And then you're about to leave and you feel a little flicker of it again. My sensations were really fucking with me. And this translated into having me question the nature of reality and feel like I was losing my mind on a heavy dose of mushrooms. And that was really fascinating to see that it could prompt an experience so intense that I really had to just kind of calm myself and use anapanna and just say, yeah, this will be fine, and just kind of talk yourself through it. But it was difficult. This was a hard experience for me. And I've kind of naturally drifted into reflections here. So I just want to share a couple other reflections for you before I get to whether you should try this. The first thing is that our minds are so deconditioned and unhealthy that it is disturbing. The mind is so agitated and unstable and erratic and worried and overactive that I think everyone would benefit from going to Vipassana and trying to take action to work with the mind, to recondition it, to get it to a healthy state. The note that I left myself here was, I felt like I was in a full body condom. My sensations were dulled, muted, and feeble, and I've already spoken to you at length about that. There was another thing I wanted to say about solidity. All solidity is illusory, and science confirms this, right? Everything is mostly empty space, and there is no permanence. So then we can extend that to say there is no self and there is no I. So I get that on an intellectual level. Sure, like the Buddha seems like he was on to something. But have you ever woken up in the night to go to the bathroom and stubbed your toe on the corner of a coffee table? Nothing is solid. There's no I. and everything is impermanent. But in that moment, now I have a permanently deformed, mangled toe, broken from an apparently illusory collision. Make that make sense. I want to ask the Buddha about that. Oh yeah, another thing I wanted to mention was there was a moment during the discourses where the teacher is giving you instruction and talking to you about Buddhism. And he said something that I hadn't realized on my previous retreats. I've seen these videos 3 times now. And it's an aspect of the philosophy that I am in conflict with, which is that, and I guess I should step back a bit and say what he said if I could remember it correctly. But what I understood the teacher to be saying was that all suffering has its roots in these sankaras. We are building them up for our entire lives. And at the time of death, that dominant sankara leaps over into the next life and colors it. And it has this echo, and all life is just echoing out, and we're incarnating in this wheel of samsara and suffering and dukkha and all of this stuff. And the Buddha is suggesting that to end this, to liberate yourself, what you are liberating yourself from is this cycle of samsara. So if you do manage to stop generating new sankaras and clear out your old store, and at the time of death, you don't generate a sankara, there's no energetic residue to slide over into that next life, then you are liberated. You have broken the cycle. You are not going to incarnate again. And when he said that, I was realizing, okay, so you're saying that the way to stop misery and suffering is to end these endless cycles of suffering that happen because of incarnating lives. So then the goal would be for everyone to get liberated. And then I thought, well, if everyone gets liberated, then there's no more life, right? There's no more, you're not incarnating again. It's over. And if that's the case, then it seems that the aim of Buddhism is effectively to annihilate all life, which to me is really unsettling because I'm going, okay, wait a minute. I don't think I agree with that. I don't know if I would take that far. You're saying that there is misery in life and life is suffering. So to stop the misery, let's just stop life. That sounds like a radical response or solution to this problem. And is it even a problem? And this is where I kind of got into where I was like, life is everything. Life isn't just suffering. There is suffering in life. Absolutely. There is enormous suffering. There are oceans of tears, as Douglas Rushkoff says. But there's so much beauty, too. There's so much love. There's so much magic and wonder and compassion and goodwill and kindness and sharing and flowers blooming and all of this beautiful whirl of wonder and magic and chaos and despair and elation. It's everything, right? Like, do I think that it's worth it to end all of that to just stop the shadowy part? I don't know about that. And I know it's more complicated. I know that maybe the end of life is inevitable, right? Science says that we are eventually going to have this heat death of the universe, right? Where everything just keeps moving into entropy until the point where the energy has dissipated and everything just freezes into nothing. Or I don't know exactly how that mechanism works, but maybe it's like the breath cycle that we spoke about earlier. Maybe everything that is just one big cosmic respiration. It's like a giant lung breathing in and out. And when we perceive the universe to be expanding, that's just the in-breath. And as we perceive it to be collapsing, that's the out-breath. And at the end of the out-breath, and at the beginning of the in-breath, there's that annihilatory, empty, dead void space, which isn't dead, but full of potential, full of possibility. And it has this animating quality where from that nothingness comes something, and it all expands and starts again. And what we'll see over and over is just this cycle. And maybe that liberation moment where everything stops and all life has been liberated from that cycle is just that little pause between the breath cycle. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. I don't know. But these were the kind of things I was thinking about during this. There's one more thing. I was wondering, isn't there such a thing as healthy attachment and aversion? And I don't mean like the bagel example. I don't mean like having a preference for something or wanting the bagel and not being angry if it doesn't happen. I mean actually craving a thing. Isn't there a certain sort of pleasure? There's a quote I remember, I think it's from the movie The Life of David Gale. Something where man is only ever truly happy when daydreaming about future happiness. Something like that. Isn't there this weird pleasure in craving, or even in aversion sometimes, that is kind of like the stuff of poetry? It's like the heart of poetry in a way. It widens the breadth and the depth of the human experience, right? Isn't there something about that? It's like having a glass of wine from time to time, right? That in itself isn't problematic. You crave the glass of wine or a beer and you drink it and it's pleasant and that's it. But once that becomes an addiction, or once all of those pleasant qualities of the craving or the aversion disappear, then it becomes a source of suffering and misery. Like, to me, it seems like there's a fine line between having these feelings of craving and aversion. There's something sweet about them, like maybe a bittersweetness. When you have that kind of sad, melancholic feeling that comes along with nostalgia, but it's oddly pleasant to think back to a time that was but will never be again. And it makes it more special somehow. And you kind of crave that past, but know you can never have it. There's something about it where I can't quite, and maybe it's because I'm not evolved enough, I'm not advanced enough along the path, but I feel like I wouldn't want to renounce craving and aversion. Like, I think that used moderately, without developing problematic, harmful attachments or aversions, there's something about them that makes life worth living in a way. I don't know if I'd want a life absent those things. But maybe that's just because I'm an unenlightened savage. I don't know. So now the moment you've all been waiting for. Should you, yes, you try Vipassana? Obviously, I can't answer that question for you. Everybody is different. And I personally don't believe that there is a single methodology or single practice that is going to work well for everyone. Because, of course, there are some people who shouldn't do Vipassana. People with serious physical limitations or illnesses, or people in active psychological crises, or that suffer from certain mental illnesses. Do I think that probably the vast population of people would benefit from it? Yes, I think so. But I think that in the same way that science says meditation is beneficial for us, you don't even need science to tell you that meditation or exercise are good for us. You could come and see. Anyone who's exercised or done meditation knows it feels good. You feel more alert. You feel more calm. You have more space. Actually, that's one thing I want to share. It's in between a reflection. I think it has a good home here, which is some people think, and maybe I did to some extent as well before I started exploring this stuff, that if you go and do a 10-day meditation retreat or you start down this path, you're just like healed. Like you've worked through your trauma and a miracle happens and you're not generating any new sankaras. You're not getting angry at anyone ever again. You've got all your shit sorted out and figured out. And you're just sitting there like a smiling Buddha, beaming light and love out into the cosmos, waiting for this incarnation to end so you could free yourself from the wheel of samsara. Like somehow we expect people on a spiritual path or people who practice meditation to have their shit together more than the average person. And I don't know if it quite works that way. I think it's a slow process. It's a process that works on deep time. It's more glacial than that. Maybe you'd be angry at your partner for an hour about something before you'd be brooding. You'd be thinking about how they wronged you. How they didn't buy the right cookies that you told them 3 times to bring you home, or whatever it is. And now maybe you're mad for half an hour. And then slowly over time with practice, because it's a practice, right? It's like stretching. You start stretching every day and you realize your hamstrings are tight and rigid and they hurt and your flexibility is poor. But then you keep doing it and maybe after a month, you see, wow, like I'm a little bit more limber. Wow, I could bend down and fit my whole penis in my mouth. Whatever is happening happens slowly. Maybe after 2 years, you still can't fit your penis in your mouth. And, the autofellatio routine that you have maybe needs to be adjusted. Maybe you need to see an osteopath. I don't know. I think we have to put these things in the proper temporal context, right? It's like a lifetime of work. This isn't just like take a 10-day course and blow all your chakras open, your third anus opens up and everything's great. That's not how this works. So I just wanted to say that if you're taking it with the motivation of becoming enlightened, I think that's the wrong motivation. In fact, that's one of the problems I have with this philosophy is that it is overly fixated, in my opinion, on personal liberation. I think that the proper emphasis or focus should be placed on the fact that you work on yourself to help others. All of this is to be in service of others. The bodhisattva inside of Buddhism is a being who enters into selfless service to liberate all beings. It's like you manage to get yourself out of a swamp that you're stuck in and you get to the shore and you could go walk to the nearest village and get into a cozy little home and get back to your life. But you turn back and notice that there are dozens of other people stuck in this swamp. There are hundreds of people stuck in this swamp. And you take it upon yourself to say, I'm going back in the swamp and I'm going to risk my own shit to try to get these people unstuck. Like that's what Buddhism is really about. That's the beauty of the bodhisattva, is that they could be liberated. They choose to stay and help others and be in service to others. So to me, I think that's why dana, that I was speaking about earlier, that you practice when you're serving, is so important. I think it's so vital and essential because it's at the heart of what this is about. When you give metta, you're giving love to all beings and you're saying, may all beings be happy. May all beings be peaceful. May all beings be liberated. You're not speaking only to the beings that you like, only to your friends and family. You're speaking to your enemies too, and you're realizing that there are no real enemies. And you're speaking to not just human beings, you're speaking to all the animals, the fungi, the plants, the beings we don't even know about. You are giving this kind of indiscriminate love and friendliness and compassion out to everyone to help them, to reduce the misery that they're feeling. And this is the most beautiful part of this whole practice and this whole philosophy, in my opinion. And so if you're going to an event like this, only concerned with yourself and healing your own stuff, yeah, that's good. It's reducing misery, and maybe it helps you be a more competent, helpful person to others. It's like putting on your mask first so that you can be in service to others. Maybe that's what you need to do. But I would say look inside yourself and make sure that the motivation is for something greater than that. I don't know. Is that another one of these conundrums where it's like, am I doing this for me or am I doing this to help others? And if I do start doing it with the wrong intention, will the natural law help me by eradicating ignorance and making me more aware, realize that that's my motivation, and then I can correct course? I don't know. But if you're curious about this course, if you want to see benefits in your life, if you want to be more patient, you want to have more tolerance for others, you want to be less reactive to your triggers, and you want to be sleep deprived and have challenging psychedelic experiences without taking any drugs. You want to feel those moments of elation and bliss and have the beautiful experience of uniform, subtle body sensations all over your entire body, so deep that the body itself dissolves and you enter into a nirvanic void state where you are one with all of the peace and tranquility and calm and compassion and love in the world. Maybe it's worth just checking it out to see if you experience that. So yeah, I can't tell you if it's for you. It's something you need to go check out for yourself. But if any of this sounds interesting or fascinating or curious, I would say you don't really have too much to lose. It could only help. It's only 10 days. So I'm going to wrap this up here. As always, be good to one another. Enjoy the rest of your day, night, wherever you are. And I'll be back next time. Thank you for passing through today. Yeah, you, dear listener. Thank you for your support, for your attention, for spending some time with me and this episode's guest. If you're enjoying this content, please subscribe, rate it, like it, tell your friends about it, buy a billboard somewhere next to a highway promoting it. I mean, I'm kidding, of course, but your support really does mean a lot to me. So thank you for listening, and I will talk to you next time.